Gracias. Quisiera plantear a la profesora Poirier una pequeña clarificación respecto a la composición del Senado, porque dijo que estaba claramente dividido o bipolarizado en la nueva reforma, pero que eran 60 miembros, pero no me salía muy claro, digamos, esa bipolarización, porque no sé si los números me daban 50 en el esquema. Entonces quería clarificar esto, porque si no... esta es una pequeña clarificación muy... En el nuevo, en el de 2014, en el que se está votando ahora. Pequeña y, digamos, muy menor clarificación. Quisiera también preguntarle sobre en qué medida han podido influir en este proceso fuerte de traslado de las competencias federales hacia las regiones, las comunidades, elementos no institucionales, pero fuertemente presentes como los cambios sociales, por ejemplo, como en la organización de los sindicatos, la organización religiosa, los tradicionales clivages que constituían digamos, la estructura de la sociedad belga, porque creo que eso también ha sido de alguna manera relevante en la forma en que se ha ido polarizando todo esto, ¿no? Entonces, pero quería planteárselo y de la misma manera como la pérdida que abundara un poco más en cómo las instituciones federales o unitarias, no sería el Estado, el rey, o sea, la monarquía, la inexistencia de partidos, digamos, transregionales, también ha ido desmontando o colaborando en esto. Si pudiera abundar un poco más en esto, que creo que también es relevante.
So the first one, sorry, I did this very early, so it might be that we don't actually add up. Let me see. Or maybe it's 50 members. I should check, sorry. So 30, let me just check. 30 plus, you're right, it comes to 50. Oh, yes, oh, sorry, I've missed 10. I should add it. I should add it. There's 10 which are what Belgians call co-opted. So they are chosen from outside the Senate by the senators themselves. The Flemish will choose 6 and the Francophones will choose 4. So there's an additional 10. And basically this normally allows for people who are not in politics officially to participate in the Senate. So they could be university professors and so on, or people who have not won their elections and so on and so forth. Or people who were not in the political parties that actually allowed them to have seats because now they are informally designated. So you're right, the numbers don't add up. So there is going to be a majority of Flemish members in the Senate, but again with the possibility of vetoes by the French minority on a lower number of issues because the powers, the competencies are reduced, but the competencies over changes to the constitution or the federal equilibrium, transfer of competences and so on, remain competency of the Senate. So the veto will remain in that context as well. Okay, for the first question. For the second question, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understood. I think, so correct me, okay, the first part of the question, maybe the question partly, if I can rephrase it, is what keeps the country together? Was that part of it? What remains at the federal level socially and in terms of organization? So you mentioned the trade unions or so it's true that, you know, when people say that Belgium has become entirely confederal, that's an exaggeration. There are still competences at the central level, justice, but also all the courts are divided linguistically. So it is federal but, okay, federal but consociational at least. The trade unions are still federal, and the reason is very obvious. The trade unions need the left to be kept alive and active, and the left is stronger in the south. So the Flemish trade unions despite their sense of national belonging and their associations with the rest of their Flemish community, basically need to keep their very close association with the Walloons if they don't want to be reduced and have their power, social power reduced. The associations of patronat, the business associations and leadership and so on, they are becoming fragmented. So even the national institutions have linguistic chambers, and then in parallel there's a Flemish group of business people. So even at that level it's starting to be split. There are other institutions that are national, some of them related to social security. So most of the major redistributive programs until this reform were still federal and managed by organizations which followed sort of traditional religious philosophical cleavages as opposed to language ones. But now that's starting to fall apart as well. So increasingly new social programs are being organized on the basis of communities, and basically the Flemish community that can afford it. So the Flemish community has introduced autonomy assistance program like there is in Spain, but only the Flemish community has it. The French side of the country doesn't because it could not afford it, and the federal government could never introduce it because there's this bipolarity, and in that case the Flemish at the center blocked the federal initiative. They didn't want to allow it to happen at the federal level because they wanted it at the community level, partly as a self-reinforcement of that national sense of, who the group with whom you want to redistribute is. And now with this new reform, for the first time, there was one part of Social Security, the redistributive system, family allowances that have been transferred to the communities. The solution for Brussels is a nightmare because there, again, people don't necessarily belong permanently to one group or the other. You mentioned the monarchy, and I wasn't quite sure what the question was. Sorry. Yeah, well, there's not very much, what keeps that country together? Jean-François Gaudreau-Desbiens, Université de Montréal, tried to explain at some point what kept Canada together, and he called it a community of comfort. It's not uncomfortable, it's not unlivable. So it's not necessarily a close, it's not a common identity, it's not necessarily a common like, but it's sort of interests, and even if the interests are diverging, it's not so intolerable that you want completely out. Is it the same in Belgium? I'm not sure. What keeps it together? Sometimes, you probably go through this here, sometimes it's very emotional. Something happens, very important things, a decision by a tribunal in Canada. That wouldn't happen in Belgium. The court wouldn't take these kinds of decisions. But right now, the football team is going to Brazil. You would not believe what that has done for Belgian identity. Now, how deep is this? But it's there. It's there. There's
it's understandable here.
Yeah. There's a certain.
Places in the world
that's
where
right.
it is understandable.
There's a certain regain of what the French call la belgitude, sort of a certain pride in Belgian things. The food, the accommodation, and so on. Brussels is sort of an in place right now. So there's a sense that Belgium is maybe not so bad. A certain, oddly, pride, and I think even in parts of Flanders, not the most nationalist, but parts of Flanders, about the fact that for the first time in 35 years, the Prime Minister is not Flemish. The Prime Minister, as you know, is Walloon, but of Italian origin, immigrant, poor, homosexual, and he's managed to keep the government together. It's a sort of miracle, absolute miracle. So there's a certain pride that, perhaps the death of Belgium was prematurely announced, that it's not quite dead yet. So there's a sense that perhaps the formula for accommodation works in the meantime. 3 or 4 years ago, nobody believed Belgium would survive. Now I think most people think, well, not forever, but for now is forever. I mean, you know, there's no sense of doom, immediate doom. Now there are elections in May 2014, we'll see, because although there is a sense of sort of general peace, I would say social peace or community peace, the predictions are that the nationalist party, the NVA, is going to skyrocket for all sorts of reasons, which you can all understand. Some of it nationalist, some of them related to just rejection of traditional political parties. And that might very well change the trend. Now, just again, to answer the monarchy, that's a real interesting paradox, because traditionally the monarchy, you know, it's associated more with tradition. The Flemish were more attached to the monarch, and the Francophones wanted more of a sort of a republic, but weren't quite clear, very critical of the monarchy. It's changed completely. And that's a paradox again. So the people are clinging to an old-fashioned, inadapted institution, but simply because they don't want too much change, and because they can't imagine who on earth would be president of a country like that. So, but it's not really a linking thing. Sorry.
Gracias. Bueno, son las 11:30, que es la hora prevista para
Sorry,
el coffee